So I'm kind of known on here for being adamantly Team Jacob. Happily, it's very true. And by the way, I am Team Jacob, full stop, meaning I prefer Jacob, of course, and Jacob and Bella are my OTP. I did used to be Team Edward. This was me. I'm just kidding. Okay, I wasn't this kind of Team Edward, but I really did used to love Edward and be Team Edward. So what happened? What changed? I will gladly explain, and this is going to take you through some Twilight fandom history because I've been here for a long time. And it's just so funny because so many people think that I speak from a place of bias, like I don't understand the Edward girlies and I don't understand why anybody would like a character like Edward. That could not be further from the truth. Couple things though, I was never Team Edward in an I hate Jacob way at all, and looking back, I was Team Jacob before I realized that's like properly what I was. And Jacob was always going to be the fictional love of my life and would have been no matter who played him in the films. But if Rob hadn't been Edward, he would have gotten the boot much earlier. That's not to say that I was Rob-cessed and didn't like Taylor as much, because that's certainly not true either. I had a crush on Shark Boy like everybody else. Taylor is a lifelong babe, believe me. But Edward really is just so not my style, not my type, and Jacob very much is. Anyway, when I first saw this book, I didn't know it was about vampires. There were no movies. Eclipse and Breaking Dawn weren't even a thing yet. And I picked it up just based on the cover because it reminded me of like Snow White, and it changed my life. Mind you, I was a child, like not yet a teenager, a child, and I devoured this book. I related to Bella so much. I was like, that's me. And this idea of this sparkly vampire man who's obsessed with you and talks like a Jane Austen hero, I was absolutely obsessed. I get to New Moon. Did this change my mind? Did I realize Edward was dusty scum? No. And you won't believe me, but I was devastated when Edward left in New Moon. I cried the months. What are you kidding? And I know you won't believe me because now I popped the champagne. Fast forward. But I was devastated. Did I ever at any point hate Jacob, or was I ever like under some weird bizarre impression that Bella didn't like him, or that she didn't have feelings for him, or that like Edward was morally superior? No, never. And that is how I know that it is 100% a you problem, because I was totally under Edward's spell. And I still knew that Jacob was going to be a love interest and that Bella loved him and that they had a special connection. And I got that from the first read. And the first time I ever got butterflies reading these books, not just like excited, but like butterflies, was the scene where Jacob gets upset because he thinks all his friends are joining a cult, and Bella like runs over and hugs him, and the way that she like describes it, and it's just like so sweet and cute, and like to this day, and I was just like, no. But I still very much loved Edward, and what really catapulted the descent into Edward madness was that at the time I was also really into this other fantasy series that you might have heard of, and through that I developed like a huge crush on this one guy you might have heard of, and I was all over the forums because that's how you talked about fandom stuff back then, on forums, Twilight Lexicon and Twilighters and Robert Pattinson Daily and everything else. And by the way, Team Jacob was always a thing before there were any movies. It was absolutely not made up for the movies. People were Team Jacob before there were any movies. It was a huge thing. But when I found out that Rob, who I was already obsessed with, was going to play Edward, I was elated. I lost my mind. So that really kept me in love with Edward for quite a while. Now, even when I was like identifying as Team Edward, I was never that Team Edward girl that would be like arguing with you about like how he was better and better for Bella and all that, because I really didn't feel that way. I did love him, but I spent a lot of time in the I love them both boat. And if you've been here for a while and you've seen me like show off my Twilight collection, you'll see that I have a lot of Team Edward and Team Jacob stuff. If you've been here for a long time, you know that I have Edward and Jacob cutouts, and I have like funny stories about how I got both of them from back in the day that I used to make videos with. I was the Twilight girl. That was very much what I was known as. I have shown these before, but they are really funny. Like I used to edit my face into pictures with them like so much. Here's one of my masterpieces. Here's another one. Graphic design is my passion. This one, because it sends me like, what is wrong with me? My head! Anyway, we got better technology and I was able to edit my face into these pictures the way that I wanted to. See, there's me. This is what I was trying to do the whole time. But anyway, while I was very Edward positive, the signs really were all there. Like New Moon was obviously always my favorite. You can see I have so much New Moon stuff. And one of the funniest things is I never read Bellward fan fiction. Like I clearly never cared that much about their relationship as much as I loved Edward. I was always reading Jacob and Bella fan fiction. My favorite fandom space was the Sort of Beautiful community on LiveJournal. Team Jacob veterans on there just love you all. God God bless you, and your amazing fan fiction that I love to this very day. And in my head, I would just kind of be like, yeah, like, I know that, like, Bella ends up with Edward, but, like, I really love her and Jacob. They're just so cute. Like, imagine, and while I was very Edward positive, there were things that, like, kind of stuck out from the very beginning, even before I had a very critical lens. Like, I always hated when Alice came back in New Moon and how nasty she was. I talk about this all the time, but when Edward slaps that 5-carat diamond on the wolf bracelet, that was just, like, so hurtful and mean and old man villain thing, and there was no way to justify it to be about, like, Bella's protection. And you want to know what a real turning point was, and this might surprise you, it was actually Breaking Dawn. Because that book felt weird and off from the beginning. And remember, like, I was like 12 reading that at the lunch table, and it was so weird with that demon baby thing. And it made me so sad. I cried and cried through Breaking Dawn. And I didn't have the lens or the verbiage to really articulate why Vampire Bella and Breaking Dawn as a whole was so off-putting and depressing to me, but I didn't like it. And when Jacob and Bella dance at the wedding, I cried and cried. And when they drive off to the honeymoon and she hears him howl and she doesn't say I love you to Edward, oh my gosh. And reading Jacob's POV just gutted me. It was gutting. It was so scary and sad and just like heartbreaking. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I do remember when Eclipse came out, I was living my Team Jacob truth, and when Edward proposes, everybody was all like squealy, and I was like, like I had to pretend, you know? I was like, I didn't want her to marry him. Of course, the pet egg atrocity he proposed with didn't help anything, but I want to say by the time the Breaking Dawn movies were coming out, I was pretty openly Team Jacob, and I had like my Team Jacob blog. It was a Twilight blog, but it was really like a Team Jacob, like Wolfpack, Bella, and Jacob blog. It was wonderful. But I was still very Edward positive, although like I had soured to him a little bit. I want to say the first time I became very critical of Edward was maybe my first like full reread after all the movies had come out, and this was long before Midnight Sun, and I was still very involved in like Twilight fandom. And I was like, yeah, I really just like, I'm so not Team Edward. And then, you're not gonna believe this, but when Midnight Sun came out, I gave him the fairest chance. And you can ask my friends. I was like, you know what? Maybe old man Glitterbag has some magic left in him after all. And it was horrible. She made him worse. I was like, you gotta be kidding. She had 15 years to make him better and she made him worse. It was Joe Goldberg's memoir. And then as you know, I entered the fandom space here to find Edward and the Cullens showered with praise, like no critical thought, just racism. And needless to say, now I am an open, proud Edward hater. And I live my Team Jacob truth, and I love you all for allowing me to do that, though I will say it was not easy. And it still isn't sometimes, but it's definitely worth it. So I hope that provides some perspective. Please know that when I drag Twilight, when I am critical, I have earned that. I live in these trenches. I have lived in these trenches for more than half my life. So Edward girlies, please chill out. And Jacob girlies, this will always be a local positive space.